Trail cameras, a unique tool used by hunters that can both help and hurt them. In this video, we'll talk about how game cameras or trail cameras can actually hurt hunters and what we can do to prevent that from happening. Alrighty, so I want to paint a picture for you. It's opening day, August 30th, here in the Idaho whitetail woods. You've had cameras out all season long. You know all the target bucks in your area. You know all the does in your area. You know exactly what trail all of these deer are going to take. And you know this information because not only have you been putting your scouting in person, but you've also had trail cameras soaking on the public lands, and you've been able to get all this information through these cameras that have been out there while you're not. Opening day comes, and you decide to go sit a stand that you have had consistent photos of a mature buck coming through right at daylight. So you get in the stand, you're sitting there, and as we all have experienced, you know, it gets to 7 a.m., it gets to 8 a.m., it gets to 9 a.m., we're not seeing anything, we're starting to question, is this the right spot to be sitting? We sit all throughout until the hot part of the day when we get down, and we didn't see a single deer. Now maybe that big buck just knew hunting season was here, but oftentimes I believe the trail cameras are misleading us for where we should hunt and how we should hunt, and it can actually do a lot more damage to have them out in the field than it does good. So we're gonna dive into why I believe trail cameras can do more damage than they can good. And the first thing I wanna just mention right off the bat is oftentimes, especially me or other, just do-it-yourself hunters are running cheaper cameras, something under $100 per camera. And these cameras are not always the most reliable. Oftentimes they'll have malfunctions where the SD card will not properly store the photos and you won't be able to receive them. Oftentimes we have problems with batteries where the batteries will run out in the camera and we aren't able to get out into the field and replace them when we need to. And then the big one as well with some of these cameras is oftentimes when that animal walks by the frame, it's just not taking a photo. And a lot of times it will be because of, the animal is moving too fast. A lot of times that photo will not be taken until the deer is already out of the frame and you won't know what was in that photo. Other times, trail cameras won't take photos because of low light. I've had multiple instances where, I've even been in the tree stand, had a trail camera below me. I've had deer come through right at last shot. And, I go to check the camera and there's no photos of them. And the camera just didn't take it because it couldn't pick it up with that low light. Another common one with cameras is if that animal is, too far away from the camera. I believe a lot of these cameras, their range is 30 to 60 feet, but oftentimes, a deer is taking a trail that's a little further from the one you anticipated, and that could also lead to the camera not taking a photo. Now, obviously, a lot of these problems can be solved with more expensive gear, but I would argue that even when you have the top-of-the-line trail cameras, you still are not going to be receiving photos from every deer that walks by. I think a lot of hunters, including me, tend to think, if my camera's there and I didn't get a photo, then that means there weren't any deer there. But a lot of times that's not the case. If a deer is walking, just under the camera and you have that camera positioned high on a tree so it won't get noticed by other hunters, oftentimes that camera won't take a photo because that deer is just not in the frame, and vice versa with the outside of the frame. That camera's view is only so wide and deer can be walking just out of frame and not get captured. So there's really just a lot of reasons why you believe the cameras are taking all the photos of deer that are walking by, but really they're not taking photos and you're having a lot of deer come by the cameras that are just not getting detected. All right, let's move on from why cameras won't be taking photos and let's move on to why is there concern for cameras and how that affects hunting. So for me personally, growing up, I found obviously when you're first using them, it's really fun, it's exciting, and I do enjoy going to check cameras. I often think of it like a Christmas present. It's one of my all-time favorite things. But I think there's a danger there because in some ways I think the camera does take the fun out of hunting. After all, I think the essence of what hunting is about is the unknown, of the uncertainty, of, not knowing if you're going to get that animal or not, or not knowing if you're going to see any deer while you're out in your stand.
And that problem is uncertainty. It's uncertainty in whether or not we'll find the animal. It's uncertainty in whether or not we'll get a shot, and if we do, will we be able to make it when we're under pressure?
I think that unknown, the essence of what being a hunter is that uncertainty. And I think that's something that's very precious that, cameras often take away from the hunt, and I think that can do a lot of damage. So obviously that's the mental side to it, of whether you know the deer in the area or whether you don't. But I think there's a physical side to it as well, because my personal belief is, from personal experience, is that oftentimes you can actually do more damage to your hunting season when you're running cameras than you would if you weren't. Now, what I mean by this is, just like the above reasons I listed, I have had in past years where I will not go hunt a certain tree stand or I will not go hunt a certain spot because I didn't receive a photo from my camera. And whether it's a cell camera or a regular just SD card camera, both sides, when you're going to check it. And, I've had multiple instances where, I'll go check my camera that's at my stand. I didn't see any deer in the last 3 days. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go hunt a different stand. I don't want to hunt that stand. And then, I'll come back a couple days later, check the camera, and wouldn't you know, that night that I was just, checking the camera, a bunch of deer came by. And so I think there is a danger with that. And as I said before, if the animals are walking by the camera but not getting picked up by the camera, I think that can do damage where, then you don't end up hunting that spot and you're missing out on the good hunting there when the deer are really there, but your camera is just not picking up on it. Alrighty, so we've highlighted some of the reasons why I believe cameras can do more damage to your hunt than good. But now I want to ask the question, so are trail cameras bad? I believe there is a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is I'm going to say no. I don't think cameras are solely bad. I think what makes them bad is the hunter. And if the hunter is not using them to their advantage, I think they can absolutely do damage to your hunt. I found that when I have a camera on my exact stand location, and then I use that camera to determine whether I'm going to hunt that stand or not, I think that is where the damage can be done. And that is where the fun can be taken out of the hunt. And I think that is something that all hunters should really pay attention to make sure that doesn't happen. So obviously there is exceptions to this. For example, a water hole would be a really good example where, in the hot summer, those animals are coming in to drink or bathe in the water hole. And there's really no need to have the camera anywhere else besides the water hole because that's where those animals are heading towards. And that's where you want to have your stand positioned because all those animals are going to end up there. But I think in general, if you're just hunting bedding areas, if you're hunting transition zones, if you're hunting a feeding area, I think if you're relying solely on the cameras to decide whether you're hunting a location or not, I think that is a very negative thing. So you might be asking yourself, all right, so how do I not let these cameras ruin my hunt? Well, as I just stated, it's pretty simple to the fact of still use cameras, still have them out, but my advice would be just don't hunt over them. And obviously I'm hunting out west. Some of these eastern guys might disagree with me on this, and I don't have a whole lot of experience hunting those eastern whitetail states, but from my experience out west hunting whitetails in a tree stand with a bow, if I'm letting the trail cameras make the decision for me over where to hunt, I always end up actually seeing less deer, I end up having less fun, and I end up actually killing less deer because I'm not in the field when I should be, I'm not sitting as long as I should, and overall it's just leading to me spending less time in the woods, and I believe time in the woods equals success. So 2 years ago was when I really learned this lesson, and I was letting the cameras essentially completely dictate where I was going to hunt and where I wasn't. And I ended up having a really rough season. I think I hunted 63 days that season. And I ended up just, by the time the season was over in December, being so sick and tired of the cameras making the decisions for me that going into the 2024 fall season, I don't even think I ran cameras almost entirely. I think I had a few cameras out at some spots that I just really wanted to get intel on. But essentially, I didn't run cameras. And I actually ended up having more fun hunting. I would end up hunting for longer days, more days, in better spots. I ended up seeing way more deer, and overall my experience was just much more positive. That would have been 2 hunting seasons ago, and so kind of moving into the 2025 hunting season, the one that's just wrapped up, this was where I feel like I really got a good idea of how to use cameras and how to not let them ruin my hunt while still being effective with using them. And I believe I had about 10 cameras out throughout the fall, dispersed along different locations, and I don't think I hunted over a camera once throughout the whole hunting season. And, while I was changing up my tactics with a lot more spot and stalk hunting, I still sat in tree stands and I still had much more fun, still ended up seeing much more deer than if I was entirely letting the cameras make the decisions for me. So, all this to say, I believe trail cameras are a tool that hunters can utilize to find success, but if being overused, they can be detrimental to your hunting season. So moving into the 2026 fall hunting season, I would encourage all of you to not let trail cameras ruin your hunting season.